I'm Kelsey Moser, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel, where no sandbagging goes unscrutinized.
Following their shocking year in which SK Telecom was essentially irrelevant within the domestic region of South Korea and therefore not a threat to win the LCK, not a threat to go to Worlds, spent most of both splits actually fighting, clawing desperately to even get into the top half of the table and even be a playoff relevant team. The squad has now made what is basically a complete rebuild. They've only kept Faker of the starters, and they've kept two of their sub players, Effort, who played at a time as a starter, as a support, but obviously they had Wolf before, and Leo, who was their AD carry support, but they substitute, but they rather used Bang the majority of the time for obvious reasons. So aside from Faker, greatest player of all time, the iconic name of this squad, and a player most people would assume can be redeemed, was not to be written off after 1 year, everyone knew is a recruit, someone else they brought in. They've recruited 6 new players in total. There are 2 big names of those would be Khan and Mata. There is a slightly smaller name, but still a very acclaimed one in Teddy. And then there are the 3 names where it's going to be a mixed bag for some people. You might have heard of some of them. You might not have been that impressed by many of them. And those are Crazy, those are Clid and Haru. So let's talk through all these moves, because this isn't just like adding one player to a roster. This is a new roster, and it's one that actually looks fucking unbelievable on paper. So we'll start and go in the order of what I think are the most significant moves. So we'll start with one of the last moves. After they made many of the other pickups, it was announced that they had been able to secure Mata. So he was let go by KT Rolster, didn't sign with them again, and he comes over to SK Telecom. So as usual, we use my formula, the KT side, the SKT side. So should KT Rolster have let Mata go? No, as far as I can tell, it doesn't make any sense to let him go. The only players individually at his position, I think you could have argued were better than him, is I would have probably said Tussin for most of the year, the player from Africa Freaks. I don't think actually the guy from Griffin comes close. Let me think. I don't think Gorilla was that good this year, even though obviously Longju was very good earlier in the year. Kings on Dragon X now. Is there anyone else we have to even consider here? KT Rolster. Genji, no, because obviously Core JJ, I mean, he didn't get a chance to do much this year. His team wasn't very good. No, quite frankly, Mata was basically, unless you have Tussin, and Tussin has far less experience and has done it for less years, Mata was the best support player in the LCK, one of the best support players in the entire world. So for KT to let him go, yeah, it's terrible. But he did give KT 2 entire years. He gave them 2 entire years as a shot caller, as a starter. They had a lot of talent there. So I can understand that aspect of like him going and them even maybe thinking time to reset, time to rebuild ourselves. Because obviously the story in KT was that they chose to rebuild around Smeb, not around Mata, and that they've been able to get BDD. So they're going to be a very powerful team in their own right. Now, moving on to the SKT side, it is a slam dunk, 100% yes, a good move of SKT to recruit this player. I already personally thought Wolf was overrated at his peak. Perhaps I'll finally get around to doing that content like that. I actually have an upcoming show of Narrative Wake where we talk about the SK Telecom dynasty, in which I touch on some of that. So I pretty much always would have said Mata is an upgrade over Wolf, but I think Wolf, especially last year, this year technically, was terrible. I think he was at his absolute worst, and I think that absolutely bringing in Mata is a massive move here, but it's more than just that. I mean, Mata, his history's amazing. Like, he's a GOAT candidate, legitimately somewhere. If you're trying to talk about who's the greatest player of all time in League of Legends, yes, Faker's so obvious. Beyond that, people might say Uzi for what he's accomplished. But actually, after you get past those names, it's perhaps names you might not initially consider, like Gorilla, like Prey, like Mata, like Smeb. These are the next kind of lines and names in line, as it were. And so Mata's one of those players. He's a candidate for the greatest of all time. Look at what he's been able to do in LCK. He's won LCK with KT Rolster now. He obviously won it with Samsung White, Samsung Ozone. I mean, they were technically MVP Ozone at the time. Then he obviously won Worlds with Samsung White. He's someone who was able to get to Worlds playoffs a number of times when he was over playing in China. He's someone who was able to, well, I guess he did it once, but he was able to be a very good player when he was in RNG. Remember when they had Whoosh was actually when they made it to the semis of MSI, and that's just because they had the best record in the group, and because SKT had the worst record, they had to play SKT in the semi-finals. He's actually could have had an even more decorated resume than he had. Very, very good player, but crucially, is not just one of the best individual support players of all time, is currently still one of the best support players. Now, I will say, he definitely gets like special treatment by fans. Like when he has bad games, people just don't mention it. But generally, he is still a very good player. But more importantly, one of the things he is legendary for, both within the MVP Ozone team, within Samsung White, and then later on with RNG, is shot calling. This is something where in the early days of MVP, he wasn't as big a deal of this, but when they got rid of Dade and he went over to the blue team, it became about Mata shot calling. That was a massive quality behind their success, winning worlds, being able to get all the success. In KT, sure, you can make a lot of criticisms of his shot calling, because they did definitely overextend a lot. I've always agreed with that from LS and the others. Like, they could have been so much better if they'd played a more efficient game. But all the same, that's because he was trying to be decisive. He was trying to use these powerful weapons of his team to win the game as quickly as possible. Not to draw it out, not to have to play SKT style and play on punishing opponents' weaknesses. Why not just make a hole in the guy now and destroy him and kill him when you can stand on his throat? That's what I've always seen as Mata's kind of decisive mentality. And so his shot calling prowess means that this could be a new SK Telecom entirely, because people know in the past Faker's done some shot calling. People know Koma has seemingly had a massive amount of influence and impact on how they set the game up and why they played that mid to late game style and played around sort of defensively using Faker as a vacuum in the mid lane and then be able to play the top side. Sure, jungle issues was one thing, but then when they got Peanut, that showed to me that this was just a philosophy they had for the game. Because with Peanut, you had this strong mechanical proactive jungler who you could have put in position to play play an early aggressive style. You had Huni in the top lane. They didn't do it as much. So quite frankly, I'm very excited to see if Mata brings shot calling elements to SK Telecom, how different this squad could be. It could be an entirely different team from any SKT we've ever seen before, because obviously they were never getting strong shot calling out of the support position. Then you've got to look at the fact that in his lane, you're taking one of the best individual supports of all time, and someone who traditionally has loved to smash lane, playing with OllieJ, playing with Imp, playing with Deft, and now gets Teddy. And for anyone who doesn't know, I'll go into this next, obviously, Teddy is an extremely good AD carry who wants to smash lane and wants to carry the fucking game. So if you take Mata and give him to him, this is amazing. This could lead to a godlike power bot lane. They could easily be able to transfer the strengths and advantages they build from the bot lane to the rest of the map. And when you look at the rest of the map, wow, this is going to be really special if Mata and Teddy can in any way get on the same page. So yes, KT letting this guy go was a big mistake. Amazing signing by SK Telecom. One of the best they've ever done in their organization, in my opinion. So let's talk about Teddy. Was it the right move for Jin Air to let him go? Obviously not. But then again, he was way too good for Jin Air. Quite frankly, there are many, many LCK teams that could have used this guy. He's so good. SKT recruiting him, I think, is fantastic. I think I actually will say with this particular lineup, with Khan coming in, they could have kept Bang. Bang's style of play would have fit the resource elements of the rest of the map, but I don't think they could have kept Wolf. And since Bang isn't in the peak form, I don't really see what the point is. I'd much rather have Teddy right now. He's actually a better player. So even though this doesn't sound like a huge signing, it's a huge signing in terms of the impact it could have on SK Telecom. Sure, Teddy's name value isn't very high because he's playing on Jin Air and they weren't a team that was going deep, that were making playoff runs, etc. But despite Jin Air, he was fucking amazing. Seriously, go look at some of the games. He is hard carrying from unwinnable positions, from shit positions, with players on his team just falling apart. That's a team that famously never got the mid lane position sorted out. A bunch of the other players were okay to decent. And then this guy, it was mainly about top on that team. It was basically Teddy was the guy who had to go fucking ham and had to carry the fuck out of them. But what I like about that is he showed how he can play in the face of adversity. So now give him Mata and see what his fucking lane does. Now give him a shot caller who can maybe make better use of what leads he builds up in CS leads and advantages in terms of the draft. And also, let's see him when he has fucking Faker and Khan in other lanes. Now pick your poison. Where are you going to go? You're going to try and shut Teddy down? Great, Khan gets going in the game. You're going to try and shut Faker down? What are you going to do to Teddy anyway once his lane gets out of control? This is going to be a very strong team. You could make a strong case this guy was the best AD carry in Korea. I know because of people like Deft, let me think who else, Viper, who else would we pick? Prey. People are going to say because these players placed highly or better that these people should be considered. But actually, Teddy was a fantastic player in 2018 in Jin Air. So let's go then over to Khan. This is more of a tricky one, because was this the right move for Longju / King's Own Dragon X to let him go? Well, on one sense, no, because they built so much of the team around him this year, and they really rode his strengths in the spring and looked amazing and unbeatable, and then once he fell off at MSI and wasn't as good in summer, then they didn't look as good a team and they weren't as dangerous a team. So I guess in that sense, no, but then again, it looks like they aren't keeping most of the players in their team as it is, so who cares in that sense? They don't look like they're a team, quite frankly, who, despite us obviously spending all the money to get that lineup, don't look like they've been able to get the top free agents at the moment, and they've ended up in a tricky situation. So I don't think they had a choice, quite frankly. SK Telecom comes asking for you, and you're Khan, you better say yes, because this is a great opportunity for you right now when a lot of people have given up on you to again be in an amazing position, and actually in this team to have even more benefits than in your other team, where now they're not even necessarily going to force you to have to carry, but you probably still can. You could look fantastic in this squad. This is a big name, but a controversial one. Now, he did have issues this year. Like, funnily enough, if somehow King's Own Dragon X could have just appeared at Worlds, I think they could have had a chance to be very, very strong, actually. This is a meta that Khan would have loved. I think Khan and BDD would have gone fucking ham. They could have had real deep placing, but obviously they didn't get there because when the meta wasn't like that, they were having a real hard time, and they were not a team that ever embraced playing through bot. One of the reasons I have my question marks about ever seeing Prey and Gorilla during the time they were in this team were the best in the world is they played so much to help the people in the top lane play well, whether it was in this team Khan, Smeb back in Rocks Tigers. That's a bit questionable for me right now, because you can always say that angle of like, oh, but anyone can just play lane. Can they? Can they be lane dominant? Didn't really look like it to me for most of the year, and they never showed us it. So his big problem was he's just not a good tank player. Like, his drop off from being on carries to tanks is just too big. Like, it is Hooney-esque. This guy's an amazing carry player. On certain bruises, he can be very strong. On tanks, it drops off a lot. Now, that's obviously quite worrying, because it means, again, you're going to have a very different style of SK Telecom. Because I know you think back in history and you go, wait a minute, they had Marin, they had Duke, they had, obviously, more recently, Hooney. These are players who are carry players. These are guys who, by choice, want to play carries, right? Well, the problem with that is Marin might have played like carry in terms of resources put into him and how aggressively he played, but this is a guy famous for playing Maokai. This is a guy who sometimes would play carries when you had to. Otherwise, he's going to play a tank absolutely, and you're going to win the game in SK Telecom style, mid to late. Then you look at Duke. If you could have played carries in SK Telecom, he would be known as a much, much better player than he is right now. Because despite the fact this guy has won Worlds twice, people still think he's just some sort of like tank player who can occasionally play the odd carry. He's a carry player who changed his whole mentality to be a tank player on SK Telecom so he could be on SKT and win Worlds, and then went over to IG, did the same thing while they kind of swazzed his ass and had the Shy just playing all the carries, and they were like, haha, Duke, you come in to play tanks. Like, dude, Swaz and Duke play tanks. They love that shit. So again, this is not going to be that kind of team. The only team comparable, I guess, is the Hooney lineup, because that was the one where they had Hooney, and Hooney could play a bit of tanks, did it early on, and then just went away from that, and they saw by his game, it's only worth putting this guy in on tanks, otherwise put fucking Untara into the game, even though he's not going to be very good. So I guess this is more comparable to the 2017 lineup, but if you'd had stronger players overall. Part of the problem of 2017 was obviously the bot lane just went to shit in SK Telecom, and then they had jungle position problems. I don't think you're going to see any Marin / Duke style top lane play in terms of how they played in SK Telecom, but this also means you can play through top a lot, but let's play straight up carries. So the meta is going to be very dependent on how important a piece Khan is. They can still win without him being very strong, but if he can be like one of the best players in the team by having the carry element, now this team looks very stacked. Now let's talk about the other new players. So they brought in Crazy, who was previously a top laner for BBQ Olivers. Now, obviously, if you're going to go to SK Telecom, you could say this is the wrong move from BBQ Olivers, but then again, I don't think Crazy's going to be getting much starting time personally. Obviously, for SK Telecom, I think this is more of a question one. This is a sub pickup for me. I don't believe they actually thought this guy was going to win the top lane spot. But you need another top laner if you've got Khan. You can't just go with nothing. Khan's even had health issues this year, so you've got to have someone else definitely in that sense. He is more of a tank player, so maybe they're trying to make this the Untara to Hooney type swap out scenario, because SK Telecom, obviously, particularly at the jungle position, have embraced having different style players for what look you want the composition to have. So I could understand that. In BBQ, Crazy was doing all right. He was one of the better players generally, I thought. He certainly wasn't some standout player, though. I never thought he had to be picked up by a top team. But you got to have some insurance if you have Khan in this squad. Now, when we get to the junglers, this is a lot more interesting. Because on the one hand, Clid, who I assume is going to be the starter, this is a guy who it was absolutely the wrong move for Jingdong Gaming to let him go. Apparently, they basically had no choice. He'd been approached by Koma. He wanted to come back to LCK. He obviously only made his name playing in China. I can understand why. People who don't know this, Jingdong Gaming is one of the best Chinese teams. They actually would have been my pick to make it to Worlds rather than EDG. But for whatever reason, EDG did a spirited run through the gauntlet and were able to make it there. Jingdong Gaming was very strong. Sure, they weren't IG and RNG because those teams were absurdly strong. But this was a very good team in the LPL, and he was one of the best players on it. He was one of the standout players because he's a very strong mechanical jungler. Like, for people who think, one thing I think is really overrated is how good Korean junglers are as like individual players. Sure, you've had players like Dandy, who was an amazing player. You had Insec, you had Kakao. Some of these guys mechanically were very strong and were very smooth. You've had someone like Score, who's an amazing pathing jungler. But you don't actually have that many Koreans who are just like absurdly good junglers from in terms of mechanical ability. Like, I guess Rush would be one, but he didn't play much in the LCK. Clid is really strong. Like, it's going to be between him and Peanut who the monsters are of the mechanical junglers this season. And obviously Clid's on, in theory, a better team at the moment, with Peanut going over to Gen G, who at the moment, who the fuck knows what they're going to be like. So this guy, what's crucial is, first of all, he can carry. He's a guy who can put on those carry junglers and he can go ham. He can be very proactive. So I know people are thinking already, you've already seen that though with Peanut, haven't you? No, because Peanut was joining an already existing SKT core. He was joining the team with the bot lane and Faker. And as a result, I think that he got trapped in the identity and the style that the team used to play and were trying to replicate because they were world champions when they were going into that scenario. And Coleman thought that was the right way to play League of Legends and how to coach League of Legends, and they'd successfully rejigged the lineup over and over again. So he thought, let's just do that again. So the problem is I don't feel like they ever got the best out of Peanut. And once he went bad, I think they really abandoned him, quite frankly, and left him on an island to look like shit, which, by the way, has happened in many of his teams. A lot of his coaches, when he flips a certain switch and starts having these bad games, a lot of his coaches just do not know how to deal with Peanut. Now, that's going to be different with Clid, in my opinion. I think he's more battle-tested in terms of how he's played in the LPL. He's played in a much more chaotic environment. I think, actually, this should be the wake-up call for Koma to use the jungler different. And this guy could be a very good jungler in the LCK. We're talking about this guy could be a top 3 jungler in LCK. This is added to all the strong lanes. You think about Teddy and Khan and Faker, and now you're giving them a guy like this to service them. This could be a fucking powerhouse squad. Now, the move that's more bizarre to me is that the guy who, as far as I can tell, is the backup jungler is Haru. Oh, one last thing to say in terms of should SK Telecom recruit this guy? Yes, absolutely. First of all, I bet you got him cheaper than a lot of other people. The only other player you can think of that they should have given a try to now is maybe Score, but Score's re-signing with KT. I doubt he's going to go to a different org for one last run anyway. It's KT or die for that guy. He wants to make it work again in KT. And even then, well, I think Score's style might have worked better. There's a world in which this team's just so powerful. They're just smashing people early and mid, and they might not even lead late game. So I'm quite excited by this. Now, in terms of Haru joining as what I think is the backup jungler, this is a really weird move, mainly because this guy's a carry jungler. This guy's an early game jungler. This guy's a guy who wants to be on strong damage dealing junglers that can gank like fuck and go super ham and take over the game. So what's the point in having him behind Clid? I would understand if this was a tank-style jungler. This was a just service the lanes only type jungler. This was a guy who just ganks when you tell him to, just farms when you don't. That would make sense then to have that Koma style, like opposite styles of play, and you bring this guy in for a different look. Because Haru, for me, is just a worse version of Clid and hasn't shown as much promise as Clid. Like, was it the right move for Gen G to let him go? If they're getting Peanut, yes. So actually, I don't have any problem with that at all. I never thought Haru fully made it through. He got his time to be a starter, just as Blank got his time to be a starter when Bengi was gone. But they saw there's a reason why they kept subbing Bengi in and why they kept subbing Ambition in. It was never that great. So quite frankly, I mean, I will say he was in the worst team ever to be an early game jungler, which is 2018 Gen G, who had no fucking early game and needed a miracle to get to the mid to late game anyway. So I don't think they give him a proper shot in that sense, and I'd like to see him on a different squad. But even so, he didn't show me a whole lot, quite frankly. And even some of the games he got in and got his jungle champions, it'd just be underwhelming sometimes. He always was disconnected from that team, which had a very particular playing style. Funnily enough, they were in some ways in the vein of the SKT classic Bang and Wolf bot lane dynasty style of play, obviously with the late game strength they had. I think he's going to be the backup jungler. I think with the overlap, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me. Maybe they just want him to contend with Clid, though, so it's not just Clid coming in and getting the spot. What's bizarre about this to me is that they completely abandoned Blossom, because I actually thought this year he did show some promise at times. In spring, he looked like he'd fully won that jungle role, but they really abandoned this guy hard when he had some bad games. They left him completely out to dry, and now they've just kicked him completely. We'll probably never see from him again. I think that's a shame. In terms of the players they kept Leo and Effort. I don't really know what the point in keeping Leo is, but whatever. I guess you need a sub nowadays, so why not? Keep an Effort. I thought Effort actually showed signs. When they took Wolf out of the lineup in spring and he was playing with Bang, I thought Effort actually looked pretty decent at times as a laning support. Obviously, Bang wasn't at his best in the spring. He got better for the summer, and then obviously that's when Effort played sometimes he didn't. Like, I didn't think it was that great. Like, the problem with that is Bang's not really the sort of person, if you're a lane support, that you're going to go off with and show massive things. So I don't mind keeping him. The problem is you're never going to get in the game if Mata's in the game, especially if Mata becomes a strong shot caller. But whatever, SKT's gone with a sub for each position. Fair enough. First things first, there's a lot of strong players in this team, and that's actually where the balance angle, I think, really comes in. Because one area I already see a flaw with this team is they've got a real lack of supportive and tank-style players. Right? Faker is so amazing. We know Faker can do that if he wants to. Like, I think Teddy certainly could play meta ADCs that aren't super powerful, but what's the point? Khan can't. Clid's good enough he can play a bunch of other jungle stuff. Haru can't. Mata can do kind of what he wants, but definitely has champions he's stronger on. I see a lack of, like, classic SKT style players in terms of the champions and the playing style. So this has to be a very new team, because this is a team with threats out of all three lanes. All three lanes could have the best player in Korea in that position and could carry out those positions. So to me, it's an issue of resources. But I will say that when you don't know the meta, and no one knows if we'll have a bet, like Season 8 Worlds, this is a very good team to have because it's very dangerous out of all the lanes. It's dangerous from pretty much all the positions. The problem is this, not having a tank top talent or a fantastic tank jungler could end up being a problem. Now, LS made the point on my show that hasn't been released yet that Teddy doesn't necessarily get insanely more gold and resources than others, but he still had way better numbers than the likes of Bang, etc. So maybe Teddy can be someone who can give up a little bit and just play like a normal AD carry, but overperform in that sense. I could see that happening. I just don't know why you'd bother if you've got Matter as well, and you're going to have him in his lane. We know Khan can't do that, and you don't want to just leave him on an island. So to me, you keep some element of SKT's traditional past, which is you keep Faker somewhat not having to have constant jungle attention. You have Khan get all the resources he needs to get online, and you either play a safe bot lane, but with a very powerful force when you get to the team fights, and still probably going to do amazingly with what you have in bot lane, or you just play bot lane strength and top lane strength and have Faker just kind of pick up some of the slack with the old vacuum style that he made so famous in the past years. The key thing here is they've got a lot of options, and they do have a couple of key players who can be the difference maker. Crucially for me, and most exciting of all, is the shot calling component, because now you've got Faker and Mata. I know people think Marin was the shot caller back in 2015 because of some weird things that I think were miscommunicated through interviews, but apparently it was Faker back then. Having Faker and Mata, two incredibly cerebral players, two incredibly good players, two players who have each other's respect, I think could cause a lot of positives for this squad and make them a very different squad. The junglers I don't think are in as much tough a spot as past SK Telecoms, and someone like Clid is actually a very good player ever. Already, I could see Mata having a whale of a time playing with Clid and then being a very dominant support jungle duo. I think also these are players where, to me, this suggests that people wanted to play with Faker. I think Mata particularly, because you'd be better off winning without Faker than saying I didn't win it with him. But now Faker's hit his rock bottom in terms of where his career's at, because he's not in a great spot at the moment. Why not play with him and then be like, I'm the guy who brought Faker back from the dead? That would be a great position for Mata to be in. And Mata obviously looking to win another Worlds before he leaves this game. I think SK Telecom, quite frankly, what's great is, first of all, they learned they have to spend big to win because they've gotten the big players. Obviously, last year was a fucking joke. This year, 2018, where they didn't even come in with a lineup that had any business doing anything. They didn't do anything all year long. They didn't add any pieces all year long that could do anything. They didn't even recruit players like Teddy before this year. They just waited until now. So I think that they saw that they couldn't keep getting away with it year after year. They couldn't keep molding players like Blank out of nowhere to come into the team, and you had to buy top talent if you wanted to win, and this was the worst year not to do it when you saw how much individual play ended up affecting the overall meta after we got out of spring. So what I like about these moves is these moves for me seemingly force them to go away from the SKT style that began in 2015 and went through to 2017. We're not going to have that bullshit anymore. We're not going to abuse Faker's strengths to cover other people's weaknesses. We've got strengths in all the lanes now, we've got strengths in theory at all the positions, and this literally could be a team that has among the best players at all the positions in Korea, can be the best team. I think it's got very, very strong players. I know the name value might not be as high, but you go watch these players play and I think you'll be impressed. They could be everything, quite frankly. They could be LCK champions. They could be world champions. This is a team that has a massive amount of upside. A few flaws with people like Khan and difficulty seeing where some of the subs are going to get play. But aside from that, I think it's a team where as long as a different coaching strategy is applied, and I guess that's one thing we'll see in this lineup is how much of what Koma did the last couple of years was how he thought you had to play and how much was out of necessity with the pieces he had. Because with this squad, I hope we don't end up with a KT roster style scenario where they don't always play the style that suits them the best or through the right lanes, despite having fabulous players. This is a team that, as I said, can be absolutely everything. They can be one of the best teams to ever play League of Legends if they're coached well and if players play to the level even that we've just seen of them last year and then the past couple of years in terms of some of them with longer years of form. Because there are some great currently good pieces here, like Klid, like Teddy, like Mata. There are some pieces that were fabulous in the past, obviously like Faker. This is a team that could do a lot in 2019. This video was kindly supported by Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Landon Thompson, Tobias Bernasconi, OllieJ, NateDOhDoubleG, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, James Harding, VeXii, Robert Baxter, Lucas Kerza Szczesny. And a special thanks, as always, goes out to my man, Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to feature in my upcoming content? Perhaps you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA. Do you want teasers from my upcoming content? See who the next guests are going to be. Perhaps you'd like to take part in a discussion about esports with me. Well, any and all of the above exclusives are available for my patrons, so put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link below.